Hi, Alan Stratton from As Wood Turns. A few weeks ago I turned this pine platter from wood that came via the club. It was pine and I didn't expect it to turn out quite as nice as it did, and I was excited about it. But I only used half of the log for this bowl, and so I thought, well, I should be able to make another piece, maybe not a platter, maybe a bowl this time, but almost as wide as this one if I do it right. In the meantime, however, I went to the Utah Woodturning Symposium and my head got full of new ideas and techniques that I'd like to try. Well, in turning this bowl, I wanted to try a very wide brim again and a bowl to the inside, maybe a little bit deeper than the platter over here. And so the brim would be out to here. And in that brim area, there was a crack in the log, and I thought, that's an ideal chance to fill that crack with solder and experiment with that technique. I also wanted to dye the inside with two colors with a zone in the middle where they mixed and created the intervening color, in this case red, yellow, and orange in between. But it was not to be. The solder flew out of that crack on the edge like a bullet. I'm just glad I wasn't in the way. But I did get some solder in a crack in a knot here, so I've got some more practice to do on that one. The dye did work, although I would like maybe a little bit more darker on the outside and a little bit more yellow here, so some refinement on that, but I call that a success. But the real bummer was that when I turned to finish the foot, I went through the bottom. I had plenty of wood, but I went through the bottom anyway. My wife calls this a dyed diet bowl because it won't hold anything. I'm not sure what to call it other than a bunch of frustration right now. I refuse to put it in the burn pile, so I will appreciate any suggestions you have on what to do to salvage this little bowl. And then next week, let's take a break, and then next week, let's finish this bowl and turn it into something truly nice.
This block of pine is the bark side half of the trunk half. I'm mounting it using a screw chuck. I've also nipped off the corners with a bandsaw. However, it is still rough going with the irregular perimeter. It's slow going to begin with until it is closer to round and I can turn up the speed. I like to cut across the side grain as much as possible. I want a wide rim and a relatively smaller bowl section. There is a crack on the outer edge. Ordinarily, I would cut it off. Instead, I'm going to try a new technique and fill the crack with solder. While I'm at it, I'll fill another crack in a knot with solder. The wood is thicker than I want. I'll cut it back, then cut a tenon. Before I finish the bottom side, I'm filling the two cracks with lead-free solder. The crack on the lip goes entirely through the wood. I've made a dam with aluminum foil for the opposite side. I'm using a small propane torch to melt the solder. It is a bit difficult to get the solder into a small crack. I'm heating an old butter knife to remelt the solder and try to work it into the crack. It does not seem to flow into the crack very well. The crack in the knot goes much easier than the rim. Then turn the bowl over to fill from the opposite side. I'm leaving the solder a bit puddled above the surface. Now I'm back at the lathe to turn down the solder to be even with the wood's surface. But as soon as I turn on the lathe, the edge solder piece flies off and hits the far wall. Oh well, I'll try to even off the solder at the knot. I'm using my skew as a scraper. I'm hesitant to turn up the speed, but I am finally able to get the solder down to flush with the wood's surface. I think the edge solder flew off because it had too little to grab to the wood. The crack was thin and did not fill easily with the solder. So I'm using a burr on a Dremel tool to widen the crack and hopefully key it into the wood. I'll also apply CA glue. Now to again fill both cracks. The knot is only half full. Again, I'm using a mini torch to melt solder into the 2 cracks. Again, the knife comes in handy to try to work the solder into the cracks. Again, I'm using my skew as a scraper to gradually work down the excess solder. It is a slow go. Again, the edge solder flies off and hits the far wall. Glad I was not in the way of that bullet. Enough of that for this bowl. Perhaps I should have filed down the excess solder before trying to turn it. But that exercise will have to wait until another bowl with a crack. For now, I'll do exactly what I did not want to do. Waste off half of the rim to get rid of that crack. I'm disappointed, but moving on, I'm using my scraper to refine the surface. After sanding, I'm cutting a small V-groove on the underside of the rim for decoration. I'm now applying lacquer to the underside. I'll let it dry before reversing the bowl. Now for the fun part, hollowing the bowl. I'm using my bowl gouge. I work at first from the rim to the thickness I want. I'm keeping the center mass to stabilize the bowl and keep the rim from vibrating. Then, with the rim finished, I can quickly hollow out the center with my large bowl gouge. The wall thickness feels good, just a little more than 1/4 inch. Before finishing, I'm checking the wall thickness. It looks great. Next, I'm trying out another technique I saw at the Utah Woodturning Symposium. After masking off my lathe and the backside of the bowl, I'm spraying on some yellow dye in the center of the bowl. My sprayer is an atomizer from an art supply store. As I blow through one pipe, it siphons dye up the other tube and sprays it. Next, I'm spraying red dye on the upper rim, overlapping the yellow somewhat. This gives me some orange at the interface. Finally, I'm applying a Sharpie to the outer rim. The black should contain the color and keep eyes from moving off of the bowl. Sharpie is not a true black, but it is black enough for me. Now I'm using rattle can lacquer over the dye. Standard brush lacquer would pick up some of the dye and smear it. That I do not want. Now to finish the foot using my do-it-yourself cold jaws. I tried a heavy cut across the bottom, but it was too much and the bowl came loose. I put it back with a paper towel for a little padding, then continued to refine the foot, cutting in line with the turning axis. With most of the wood removed, I can now take a light push cut across the bottom. But suddenly the bottom went dark. I had thought I had enough wood. I even measured. But obviously I've cut on through. This bowl is too pretty to burn, so I'm dressing up the hole, then sanding and finishing the bottom. What a bummer. I intended to turn a wide brim bowl, fix the cracks with a new technique using solder, and try blending dye for a transitional color blend. Well, instead, my wide brim turned into a small rim. One crack in the knot did get filled with solder. The dye blending worked, except next time I'll spray more yellow out onto the rim and more red into the center. Worst of all, I cut through the bottom. That's enough for today. I'll take a break now, but I am not finished with this bowl. I'm open to suggestions on how to salvage this bowl. Please put them in the comments. Then come back next week for the sequel. We'll see you again next week for another wood turning video. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and tell your friends. Always wear your full face shield. Goggles are not enough protection. Until next week, this is Alan Stratton from As Wood Turns. Let's keep turning.